Have you ever done work that you're genuinely proud of, work that was thoughtful and thorough and high quality, and then you watched it essentially disappear? No recognition, no follow up, just silence, like it never even happened. If this has happened to you, I want you to know it's not because your work wasn't good enough. And it's not because the people above you don't care. It's because of something much more specific and much more fixable. In this episode, we're talking about why great work goes unnoticed and what rising leaders do differently to make sure it does get noticed. The answer has almost nothing to do with working harder. Most ambitious professionals, they operate under a belief that goes something like this. If I do exceptional work, people will notice. The work will speak for itself, and I will be rewarded accordingly. And so they knock themselves out, and they do all that extra work, and their family never sees them again. This is a completely logical belief, and it's one of the actually most expensive assumptions that you can make in your career. In her book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, Herminia Ibarra, she talks about the concept of outsider thinking. Her research across hundreds of executives found that most high performers, they're so deeply embedded in the execution of their work that they become essentially invisible at the organizational level. They're known within their function, but they are not known across. And promotion decisions are almost always made by leaders who sit outside of your immediate function. Adam Grant from Wharton, organizational psychologist, he focuses on the givers and the takers in the workplace. And he found that the highest contributors in organizations are often the least likely to advocate for their own visibility, which paradoxically can suppress your advancement. The people doing the most, they're often the least visible people to the ones who are making the decisions. So this is not because of politics. This is all because of proximity. So here's the uncomfortable reality. This is how organizations work. Your immediate manager sees your work, maybe, but the leaders who influence promotion decisions, they're often 2 or 3 levels up. They don't attend your team meetings. They don't see your late nights. They see signals. They see moments and impressions that filter up, that may or may not filter up. So if you're not intentionally shaping your signals, then somebody else's narrative fills the vacuum. I had a client, Priya. Clea was rated a top performer very consistently in her annual review. And her manager loved her, her peers, everyone counted on her. But when a director level role opened up on a cross-functional initiative, she was not even in the conversation. And when she asked her manager why, he was honest with her. He said, I know how good you are, but the SVP running that initiative, he's never heard your name. She'd done everything right inside a room that the decision maker had never entered. So the problem is not the quality of work. The problem is what happens or what doesn't happen after the work is done. So let's talk about what rising leaders actually do differently that solves this. Let's talk about 4 practices. These are visibility practices that are practiced by rising leaders. Number 1, most professionals share results. Rising leaders share the thinking behind the results. When you share only your outcomes, leadership sees output, which is good. It's simply that when you share your reasoning, the trade-offs you weighed, the risks you anticipated, the judgment calls that you made, leadership sees so much more than the outcome, than the output. They see a decision maker. They see you as a decision maker. And research backs this up. Research in the Journal of Applied Psychology on sense giving in organizations found that leaders who proactively explain the rationale, the sense behind it, the rationale behind decisions, they're perceived as significantly more competent and more trustworthy than people who just report the outcomes, even when the outcomes are identical. Those 2 words, that they're seen as more competent and they're seen as more trustworthy, that is stunning. You had the same outcome. It's simply that you gave a sense of what your rationale was and what your thinking was. So it might sound like this. Let's say you're in a leadership meeting and you are getting people up to date. You could say, we completed the vendor review and we selected option B. And what's great about that is, of course, it saves time. And yet, while you want to be respectful of people's time, you just robbed yourself of an opportunity to make sense of why you chose option B. So you might say instead, we reviewed 4 vendors and the decision came down to 2. Option A had lower cost, but option B gave us flexibility, and we're going to need that when we scale in Q3. So we chose B. It's still pretty short. You gave a little bit more, not a lot more, and you gave them the sense of what led you, of your thought process. It's the same result. It's just the second version shows your mind, shows your mind at work. And that's what leadership is looking for. They're looking for that good mind. So before you share anything, before you give an update, before you get people up to speed, think about this. Am I sharing what happened? Or am I sharing how I thought about what happened? You got to ask yourself that question. And then there's the second area. It's one of the most underestimated career moves, and that's lateral relationship building. When we think about, I got to go to the next level, and so I got to think about making those relationships like up. We think up, up, up. But promotion decisions are really made by one person. They're made in rooms where multiple leaders are asked, what do you know about this person? And if you've only invested in the relationship up with your direct manager, then you just have one advocate in that room. Whereas rising leaders build a web. In the 1970s, a young sociologist at Johns Hopkins named Mark Granovetter, he was trying to solve what seemed like an easy puzzle. He wanted to understand how people find jobs, not how they think they find jobs, but how people actually find jobs. So he did something very simple. He went to a suburb of Boston and he asked a bunch of people, 282 people to be exact, professional workers who had recently changed jobs. And he asked them all the same question. How did you find out about this position? Now, what he expected was that people had landed jobs through their close relationships, their good friends, their trusted mentors, the people who really knew them best and would go to bat for them the most. And what he found was the exact opposite. The majority of people, nearly 84% of people, had found their job through someone they described as an acquaintance, not a close friend, not a mentor, an acquaintance, someone they saw occasionally, a former colleague, a peer, maybe from another department, or someone they'd have coffee with once. And then the more he dug in, the more the pattern held. The people who vouched for these candidates in hiring conversations were not the people who knew them intimately. They were people who had just enough exposure to them, to their thinking, to their approach, their reputation, that enabled them to say, you should talk to this person. Granovetter called this the strength of weak ties, and it turned conventional wisdom completely on its head. And what it meant was this. Your close relationships, they already know you. They're already in your corner. But the people who actually open doors for you are almost always the people on the periphery, people who have just enough visibility into your work to put your name in a room that you're not in. Which means the professional who keeps their head down and delivers excellent work and only invests in the relationships directly above them and directly below them, they are quite literally invisible to the people most likely to be able to change their trajectory. Now, this, as you can hear, this was a landmark study. It found that career opportunities and professional advancement flow mostly from and through acquaintances and lateral connections, not your close relationships. Your strong ties already know you, but it's the extended network that opens doors. So that was back in the 70s. The question then is it still that way today? And LinkedIn did a study in 2022. They found that professionals with strong cross-functional relationships, they were promoted at nearly twice the rate of people with siloed networks. I worked with a leader, James. James was deeply respected in his function, but every time a cross-functional leadership role opened up, someone from another team seemed to get the nod. So we spent some time looking at this and we mapped out his relationships and we found the issues. He had very deep vertical ties, very strong relationship with his boss, very strong relationship with his direct reports who loved him, but almost no relationships with his peers in other functions, in other groups. So we went to work changing that, and he took the next few months and he started joining cross-functional working groups. He reached out to peers in adjacent departments just to understand their challenges, no agenda. And of course, didn't take very long. Within a year, senior role opened up. It spanned 2 functions, and 3 different leaders independently recommended him. He had not changed his work. He'd simply changed his footprint. So the question to ask is, who are the 5 leaders outside my direct chain who could speak to my contributions? And if you can't name 5, then that's the work. And if you feel like, that's not my place. I mean, I need to show my boss loyalty to my group, and to step outside of it, that seems like I should be asking permission, or it seems like that's not my purview. And that might have been that way in the past. I certainly felt that way earlier in my career, but as time progressed, and certainly more recently in my career, it's not the way things work now. It will help your group and it will help you the more you understand what's going on across the organization. And then you can work in a more well-informed, holistically, strategically well-informed way. And then, of course, that also comes back to help you on the topic that we're discussing. The third area is one that makes most people uncomfortable because it can feel like self-promotion, which people generally do not like to do. But there's a real distinction here. It's not self-promotion. Self-promotion is look at me. Deliberate visibility, and that's what I'm talking about. Deliberate visibility is very different. Self-promotion is look at me. Deliberate visibility is here's what this work means for us. One is about ego. The first one's about ego, but this one is about helping leadership understand value, which is a service to the organization. As at Stanford, the Graduate School of Business, Jeffrey Pfeffer, Professor Pfeffer, he found that professionals who proactively create opportunities to show their thinking, to demonstrate their thinking in forums, in presentations, in cross-functional settings, they advance faster. And again, it's not because they're better performers. We're talking about what they are showing, and it's because they're growing faster because they are known performers, not necessarily better, just known. And same thing came out at Harvard. Harvard Business Review did an analysis of advancement patterns at Fortune 500 companies, and they found that one of the clearest differentiators between the high performers who advanced and the ones who did not, the ones who plateaued, was what researchers called proactive contribution framing. What is that? That is making a practice of contextualizing your work within organizational priorities rather than just reporting what you're doing. So you're thinking big. You're thinking big. And here's 3 areas. Here's 3 actions. And really there are 3 moments that to be a rising leader, you want to capitalize on. The first one is the pre-meeting. Before a big presentation or before a leadership meeting, a brief message to a key stakeholder. We're presenting the findings on Thursday. The main takeaway I want to land is X. I'm happy to talk through it beforehand if that's helpful. That's it. That's it. You've already got a key stakeholder who you've planted this idea with and that you've potentially engaged. So now they feel more engaged and they feel more bought in when you get to that actual presentation. The second one is the post-win. So let's say you have a project and it succeeds, and after that succeeding, you want to send a short note to the senior sponsor. Wanted to close the loop, the client approved the proposal, the team navigated some real complexity to get there. So you're just planting that in there. You're planting in both of these situations. And then in the third one, we're going to look at you're planting this information about you, about what you're working on, and the importance of it. The third piece is the informed opinion. When a senior leader asks for your input, you have to give input. Not, you don't want to say that's a great question. There are a lot of ways to think about it. That's not a time to say that. You want to give a real considered perspective. I had an executive, like the chief counsel of an organization, corporation, very large one that I was working with, who pulled me aside and she said, I have concerns about this attorney who's in my group. And I asked them a question in a recent meeting, and they said, that's a great question. I'm going to need to think about it. Now, that person told me on the side, because I was coaching that individual, which was why that senior executive told me. The person told me, Mim, I was in this meeting and I was thinking about something else for a moment. I was distracted by something. And all of a sudden, the most senior person, this executive, asked me this question. I had not even heard what had come before it. So I felt like I couldn't admit to that. And so I said, well, that's a good question. Let me think about it. And of course, that wound up not going well. And so let's rewind the tape. If our third piece is the informed opinion, and you might get put on the spot at any moment to give your informed opinion, the encouragement here is you got to stay in touch. You got to stay in tune. When you're in these meetings, you go all in. You bring your full focus. So you don't get in a situation like that where you disappoint your boss's 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 boss and you don't look good in front of them because you couldn't answer their question in the moment. You've got to give an informed opinion. So do your homework. And then when you show up, you stay centered and you stay focused on what you need to do and what's happening in that meeting. None of these are self-promotional in a bad way. The pre-meeting, the post-win, the informed opinion, these are not distasteful at all. These are forms of helping leadership to stay informed. And that's exactly what senior leaders are supposed to do. So you're showing them that you're helping them do that. The fourth area, there's a difference between being someone who gets things done and being someone who is known for thinking about the business. When you're at the individual contributor level, the IC level, your value is definitely tied to what you deliver, to your deliverables. But when you get to a higher level, when you get to the senior leader level, your value is tied very differently. It's tied to your perspective. And rising leaders start to make this shift early. And wannabe leaders do not. What rising leaders do is they surface ideas. They proactively call out risks that they see. They position themselves as people who think about problems before being asked. So there's that level of proactivity. Linda Hill at Harvard Business School did a long-term study of new managers, and she found that the transition from IC to leader is fundamentally a shift, first and foremost, in identity. It's from I am someone who does, that's a former identity, to a new identity that says I am someone who thinks about how we do what we do. And the professionals who make this transition fastest, they were the ones in the study that began practicing this identity shift before they were given the title. This is big. It's like you think about two professionals sitting in the same strategy meeting and a challenge comes up. Let's say the challenge is about customer retention. And the first person listens and they take good notes and they follow up on their action items. It's all very efficient. But the second person listens and then either in the meeting or maybe in a follow-up email, they say, I've been watching a pattern in the customer data that might be relevant here. Would you like me to pull it together? Proactively. That's their idea. They're coming up with it and they're being thoughtful and reflective and they're demonstrating that. Both of these people are competent. It's simply that one showed that they're thinking about the business and not just their work. So this shift here, this is a shift from what am I responsible for to what do I notice and then proactively bring up about it. Rising leaders, they start acting like stakeholders because that's what senior leaders are. I had a client, Rachel, and Rachel was a senior manager. She worked at a tech company. She'd been in that role for about 4 years, and her performance reviews were strong. Team loved her. But every time that director conversation came up, The feedback she got was, no, it's not quite a fit. It's not quite a fit. And nobody really told her why it wasn't a fit. And so we dug in and we looked and we dug and we explored and we found a pattern. Pattern we found was that Rachel's work, of course, was excellent, but it was essentially invisible to anyone above her manager's level. She sent clean status updates and she closed her action items. I mean, she was great at what she did. She rarely spoke up in leadership forums. And it wasn't that she had nothing to say. She just didn't want to feel like she was overstepping. She didn't want to seem like, ooh, I'm stepping beyond what's appropriate here. So she was trying to be appropriate and professional, and it was actually shooting her in the foot. So we talked about how she could, without being obnoxious or overstepping inappropriately, we talked about how she could shift her approach. And we looked at 3 specific ways. She started adding 1 sentence of strategic context to every update she sent. And she began proactively flagging risks. No one asked, but if she saw a risk, she brought it up. And then she did some preparation and then requested a monthly 15-minute connection with her skip level leader. Now, I know that some companies have skip levels baked into their process. You'll have a meeting with your skip level, your boss's boss, every 2 months or every quarter or something like that. And she decided, okay, I want to do it every month, so I'll make it shorter, just 15 minutes. I want to be in touch with them on a monthly basis. And it worked for her within several months. Within less than a year, that skip level manager that leader told her manager, I feel like I've just discovered Rachel. She's the same person. She was doing the same work. But now that work had more of a voice and had more of a face and certainly had a point of view. And she got a promotion about 6 months after that. So what does this mean for you? Here's a takeaway from today. Great work. Think about this. Great work. It's the price of admission, but it's not the key to what's going to happen next. It's necessary, but it's just not sufficient. It's not enough if you want to rise, if you want to be that rising leader. We used to think that it was all about great work. Great work is your foundation. Now you got to go further. The people who rise, the professionals who rise, they're not just doing great work. They're doing something just as important as that great work. They're making sure that the right people understand the thinking behind the work, the impact of the work. And over time, they make sure that those people see the kind of leader that they are becoming. This is not vanity. Visibility is not vanity. For rising leaders, visibility is your responsibility. So here's your practice for this week. If you'd like to do it, it's a simple one. But don't underestimate this. Just think about a piece of work that you completed recently, something you're proud of, something that had impact. And ask yourself, does the person 2 levels above me know this work exists? Do they know the thinking behind it? Do they know the difference that it made? And if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then that's your assignment. You're not going to go brag. You're going to find one natural, professional way to make the value of that work visible. Maybe you're going to write a note to a stakeholder. Maybe you're going to give a concise update in the next leadership meeting. Maybe you're going to make a proactive connection with a cross-functional peer to get that ball rolling. The goal is not to be seen for just the sake of being seen. The goal is to make sure that when the conversation about who's ready for the next level comes up, and it will come up, that your name is already in the room.